Yo.
Hello.
All right. Okay. We're going to go right into this as soon as I get everything set up. Okay. Bluetooth speakers are on now. Oops. Delete track. Okay. Going to add a new track, which is my mic. Okay. Going to add a new track, which should be
Me.
Yeah.
No,
Let me
it's
see.
not me.
Well, yeah, of course. Set up the voice track. Audio from chat, default. Yeah. Set up. Okay. See, here's the thing is I don't want to get that stupid issue where we start recording and then it's all fucked up. So I think we can do some sort of sound check.
Okay.
And of course we're live, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
on YouTube.
that seems fine.
Yeah. Give me 1 second. Volume check. I'm checking my volume. It looks good. This is dumb.
Cool.
Do I have the site muted? I don't know.
Do you have it muted?
I don't know. I don't. Go ahead and say something.
I'm talking. I'm getting levels in that app. Yep.
Okay, let me try one more time.
One more time.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it's talking double. I'll keep it muted. All right. Let me do a sound check on yours. Go ahead and go.
I'm going to go ahead and go. I'm going currently.
We fixed the volume level. Oh man, that's great. They actually like adjust the volume level.
Oh,
Okay.
nice.
Yeah, we're gonna. I'm using headphones. Okay, I think we're recording.
Cool. Yeah, it says it's being recorded to me.
Cool. We're recording and we are live. And we want to do this sort of thing. Doohickey.
Look at how
You are
zoomed in we are.
so out of focus.
I'm just me. I'm
Do you
kind of
like that
fuzzy
lip
looking
bite?
in general.
Not so much actually. You're fuzzy from like the nose down. Not very fuzzy from the nose up. Pretty
Fuzzy
smooth
from
from
the
the nose
nose
up.
down.
Yeah.
I like
You
it.
see what
I
I
like
did
it.
there?
I can accept that.
Yeah. I'm the opposite. We should probably let's intro the show. Yeah, let's get started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds like a good idea.
Hey, Grant.
Hello.
Just you. What's up, my dude?
Word.
My fuzzy dude.
It's Thanksgiving week.
Gobble gobble. Way to date us. Now when people hear the recording, they're gonna be like, "Oh, what?"
I mean, I'm really comfortable with that.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah. You don't have to do any of the editing, but yeah. People are gonna see how lazy I am by the time this comes out. Like, dang.
Dang, it's been
Maybe I should
6
just time it.
months.
Yeah, you know what? If I time it for about a year, we'll actually look very
You're
on
super
point.
on top of
Just
it.
don't say
Yeah.
what year it is. Don't say what
Okay.
year it is. The
I
pandemic is over. I mean, what pandemic from?
what
Wait,
what?
I should give myself some buffer there.
Well, yeah, which
uh,
pandemic is really the question at that
yeah,
point.
yeah. Exactly, exactly. Still some gray area. How's your week going?
It's such a good week, honestly. A lot of people I work with are out this week, and so I have
So
almost
that's why it's a
no
good week.
meetings. Yeah, like I don't have to do. So I'm in this position right now where I'm split between doing like very kind of forward thinking planning and future work, and making sure that the work that we're doing now is flexible enough to fit into our plans kind of down the road, yada yada yada. And so like I'm split between doing that and then actually building what we're working on now so that we can like uh eventually release this stuff into the public. So it's
Yeah.
nice to just be able to kind of focus on one instead of time traveling all the time.
Yeah, that's killer. The context switching is just, it's such a drain on energy, and you don't do good work. And yeah, being able to focus on stuff, and especially stuff that's going to like be cool for the future and not just focusing on bug fixes or crappy work. That's always fun.
Yeah.
So, you know what's interesting? I
What
always
is it?
ask you about your week. You never ask me about my week.
I have. You get mad. It's like when I introduce you, you get all upset. You're like, that's my job.
That's also, you don't introduce me. In fact, we have a recording where I introduce everyone, and then you're like, "Oh, should I introduce you?" Oh no,
You,
I did
you told
say.
me not to.
Well, I didn't. No, I didn't tell you not to introduce me. This was a key point. I told you I didn't want to ask you to introduce me because that would
Oh,
make
that's
me look
right. That's
needy.
right.
That's
Yes.
how it
You
was.
you don't want to be asked. You just
Exactly.
want me to know that
I
that's the
don't.
right thing to
Yeah, I
do.
don't want to tell you what I want. I want you to know what I want.
It's
We have a
dynamic.
complex relationship.
It's a real vibe in here right
Yeah.
now.
But yeah, my week's going well. Thanks for asking. I started a new job. I am officially a senior developer advocate for Akamai, and I'm going to be focusing specifically on their edge workers.
I think your audio kind of broke up there a little bit for who?
Akamai?
Is that a real word?
Yeah, actually, it's a Hawaiian word.
Oh, okay. I thought your audio got like garbled for a second and it was like never mind.
It's a legit company that's been around for 20 years.
No, we use Akamai at DocuSign in some capacity, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it should be really cool because mostly I'm excited for the future of um, edge functions and stuff. I know that we kind of talked about it a bit.
Yeah.
We've talked about Cloudflare stuff in the past, um, and yeah, I just think that there's such a thriving ecosystem that's developing and growing, and uh, edge stuff. It's cool. It's going to be really awesome. It's going to complicate the tech stack for sure, but it's going to
Yeah.
also unlock a lot of cool potential.
How
I'm
stoked
excited.
are you with the remix run stuff coming into this position is very serendipitous. It's super nice.
Yeah, so I saw that they announced version 0.1 officially, and they
Mhm.
also, with that announcement, they transitioned from closed source or like payment model to
Mhm.
open source. And they got some big funding too, didn't they?
Yep.
Yeah.
I
So
think a
what's their
lot of that is
deal?
around exactly what you're talking about, where they are moving the stack from purely like static rendered and then client side and then some cloud functions to like being much more inclusive of the edge functionality stuff. I don't know much about it to be totally honest, but from what I've read, that seems to be the case.
Well, that's right in our wheelhouse for things to talk about. things that
It's
we know very little about and have strong opinions.
yeah. To be like honest, I don't like it. It freaks me out. It's something about it just strikes me as like this is so. A lot of it is being sold as, and this is from somebody who hasn't used it, right? A lot of it's being sold as what is that overarching concept where progressive enhancement, right? It's being sold as the solution to progressive enhancement in a modern stack, which seems
Hmm.
cool, but it also goes through these phases. Like from looking at their documentation, it goes through these phases on the client of like we're going to ship like minimal JS, and then when we need more, we're going to ship the kind of next level up. It's kind of the equivalent
Island.
of like blur up images where you have like a source set, right? But a source set
Hmm.
for JS strikes me as potentially really, really buggy. And maybe like I just don't understand the way that it works. But the example that they show, like literally on their doc site, has JS, like, I'm sorry, a basic form with no JS, a basic form with uh, some JS, and then like a full like controlled component React form. Um,
I love that.
and how do we ensure that this does not break? This sounds like really, really difficult to trace bugs waiting to happen. Really, really difficult to trace. Like
So
bugs are hard
are
enough to
these
trace in a modern stack
hold
anyway.
on.
Oh man,
Hold on.
three.
Are these like the same component that like slowly incrementally improves, meaning it ships a Node.js form, and then in some scenarios it ships like some JS, and then in other scenarios it's just like complete client side
So
generation?
this is where my understanding starts to fall apart. Is I don't know what
Okay.
scenarios it's shipping what, but the
Okay.
way the impression that I get from their documentation, and this is literally me scrolling. Their documentation has this really, really slick. As you scroll, it like tells you the story of Remix Run. Like the way they did their docs is super dope. Or I'm sorry, the way they did their uh, splash page, if people are calling it that,
Mhm.
that reads like documentation and then links off to more detailed documentation. Um, but the way that it's presented from them is almost like a blur up image, right? Where you get more and more JS as whatever scenario changes, right? And I don't know what the scenario that is. It just the idea of bundling in general right now, transpiling and like what types of modules you're shipping to the browser and how that impacts the code from the developer experience to the client experience is complex enough, let alone allowing for these kinds of minimal JS state and then like full JS state and then like no JS state. Like this is
I love it. This is going right back to the things that I care about. Those are the things that we've been talking about in the episodes where we talk about getting pegged and uh
you're very into that. It's not my cup of tea. I'm not here to judge,
the
but
no, well, come on, get on board, man. Just try it. Progressive enhancement, baby, and graceful degradation.
graceful degradation. Graceful
I-
degradation
pro-
sounds that's well, that's like a southern
It's a back. Yeah. It's
bless her
bless your
heart.
heart.
Graceful degradation.
Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah, I don't know. I'm excited for this sort of stuff because I really love the idea of shipping just HTML and CSS where it's all you need,
Yeah.
and using JavaScript to enhance that experience, where you can,
I mean,
and
that's like the
shipping
whole
less
point of
JS.
JavaScript. That's the whole point of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's
cool.
just
It's exciting. It's kind of in the same vein as like the Astro.build stuff,
mhm.
which is cool. So do you want to talk about ASTs, bundlers, and compilers?
I mean, in the vein of talking about stuff I know nothing about, but probably have some strong opinions about, let's do it.
Okay. So I wanted to bring this up because, as we know, I've been working on this project, It is a CSS project that kind of like it's sort of like CSS and JS that gets removed at build time. So I basically have to do some transpiling where I look at your JS code. I find when you reference my library, I rip out the reference to my library, transform your code, and replace the reference to my library with a static string of class names. And at the same time, uh, pull your styles into a static CSS file that builds out the styles associated with the classes that I give you.
Mm-hmm.
Clear? Fair enough. We've kind of
Yeah.
discussed it, so hopefully
Yeah.
the listeners were able to grok that.
It's Webpacky type things.
Yes, and here's the thing, man. It was complicated. So I started trying to target Webpack, and it was weird. You got into like you need to create some virtual module things. You got to get Babel involved and transpile things. And I guess let's just kind of go back to the root of the conversation is this idea of let's start with transpiling code, right? So that idea that I'm telling you, I'm going to take your code, I'm going to read through it and modify it and replace some things and remove some other things and do whatever. All of that happens during a transpilation process where you take in some code and you modify it and you spit out different code. And the way that all of the build tools that are doing that today is with ASTs, abstract syntax trees.
Yeah.
You heard of that before?
Yep.
So an abstract syntax tree, let me see, AST. Yeah,
Wikipedia.
a really good. Yeah, I'm not going to try and explain this over podcast format because that's just ridiculous. But a really good way to get a better idea of what's going on is if you go to astexplorer.net, and it's going to give you kind of the familiar two-pane screen where you have like a text editor on the left-hand side, and then you have essentially the AST Explorer on the right, which looks like a tree or like JSON. And so if you just type in 1+1 on the left-hand side, and that's going to be standard JavaScript that works. On the right-hand side, it's going to spit out a tree of objects or JSON objects or whatever, however you want to look at it. And it's going to show you that you have a program, and inside of that program, there's a body, and inside of that body is made of expression statements which have binary expressions. And then basically as you drill down in this object through this tree, you're going to have different smaller objects that represent each part of your program. So when the original source was 1+1, that is transformed into an AST representation of that program. So you're going to have something for the first number one, something for the plus sign, something for the second number one. And I can't explain it any better than that. You kind of need the visual. So astexplorer.net is really good if you want to learn more, or if, go to Wikipedia if you need more about what an AST is. But essentially, most of this transpilation tooling and bundling that we're doing these days kind of relies on these ASTs. And so in the JavaScript world, most of the tooling that generates these ASTs come from one like similar ancestor called Acorn. It's an NPM library, and it takes JavaScript, it parses it, and spits out an AST. So all this to say that this is like the lingua franca?
No one knows what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about.
Do you know what the term lingua franca? It means like the shared language, right? So English is like today's lingua franca, where if I go to Europe, to various countries in Europe or Asia or South America or whatever, most likely the most commonly used language is English.
Okay.
Right? So these ASTs and Acorn flavor ASTs have become kind of the most commonly used language for these transpilation libraries. And I wanted to talk about it because it's something that as you're writing JavaScript, you really have no need to learn. I think maybe folks with a computer science background probably have more experience with ASTs. Uh, just an impression. I don't have that background.
Well, people who
Um,
have had exposure to a CS background, I think typically will learn about compilers and
yes.
ASTs and lexers and all of these types of things are kind of a part of that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's it's a very interesting thing because at some point you need your tooling to take a string of JavaScript, turn that into an AST. And then the reason why you want an AST in the first place, I believe, is because not only do you have the same language, like if I wanted to modify your JavaScript code, I don't want to do that with a string because then I'm relying on some sort of search and replace and some sort of weird regular expression, and you're just going to have a ton of bugs, right? Like
True. That's
let's
a
take let's
bad
take
move.
yeah, let's take a very simple example of what my library does. You import a named export called CSS from
Mhm.
my library. So it looks like import curly bracket CSS close curly bracket from quote CSS or from quote particle CSS, right? That alone, I could probably write a regular expression that handles that. And there may be a difference between if you have spaces or no spaces between the curly brackets or not, right? We're treating this as just a static string. I could write a regular expression that does that. But what happens if you rename my that import, right? So you
Yeah,
do
import
import
this
curly
as
bracket.
that. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, import CSS as grants CSSC floofadoof, right?
Mhm.
Um,
As I tend to do.
yeah, yeah. I
I
love
like
your naming
renaming my
conventions.
imports uh, all the time. I want
Yeah.
no one to understand what my code is doing.
Well, I think renaming imports is good in some cases. Like the name can be very like too vague. You can make it more specific, like which library it's coming from.
In a project where you're
Shit.
sharing code with some other people, uh, I think if you agree, like across the board, to rename one specific import if it's not specific enough, that makes a lot of sense. And there's definitely libraries that could use that. But the just kind of arbitrarily doing that can run into big trouble, I think.
Yeah, well, all this to say that
Mhm.
it doesn't um the benefit of using an AST is it doesn't matter whether like I can avoid trying to search for so many things. Like that was just the import statement, right? Then let's say that
Right.
I need to actually replace where that function was actually called. You know how hard it would be to do that to like search for what you called it when you imported it and renamed that import and then where you actually executed that function and then I'd have to take that out and replace it with what I want to replace it. Like to do that as a string transformation is not going to be fun.
So
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 something that may work as an analogy here, right, is working with a CMS where in some cases what you get back from a CMS is just strings, and sometimes people will settle on this pattern, this like replace this string replacer pattern, right, where you put in specific symbols to represent certain parts to replace for like translations or numbers or whatever, and so going through and running like a string replace on these things in specific areas. Or so this is like your kind of find and use a regex to find and replace all of these values and like a text string, which is like wildly dangerous. And there's a lot of things there that can break versus using a CMS that hands back structured data. so you know exactly what goes where. You can plug it into where you want it to go,
Exactly.
and you're not putting the responsibility of processing content and then producing this kind of meta content, this side effect of the content that the user gets to see, right? They see exactly what the content person entered because it's unaltered. It's just placed specifically about the application or page, right? And so when you're working with an AST, oh yeah, and a lot of times, so stuff like fields in CMSs that are like rich text fields or markdown fields,
Yeah.
they will send you an AST.
Yeah.
And these things, on one hand, are kind of a pain to work with
Yep.
because it's a complex structure, but it's a predictable structure, and so you can write a parser for it. And so,
Yeah.
in our case, in the case of using Contentful, they use, I think, Slate under the covers, and so that gives us an AST. They have a parsing library that we can use on the consuming end, so that we have like just a reliable way to turn that into useful structured data instead of like traversing this tree structure that can get kind of deep.
Right, right. So the example as an AST or as a CMS AST would be like if I store some information about this content and I have several fields and one of the fields is a number and one of the fields is a date, when I hit save and I grab that data from that piece of content, I will have like an array of fields with a bunch of objects, and I'm not going to get just like a string with the date and the value of the number as like separate things. I'm going to get objects with like type of date, value, whatever the date was, type of
Right.
number, value, whatever the number was, and even more. So, yeah, and it's really interesting that you bring up the CMS point because I think that more and more I see full on applications built just with these like block things. Like I think Notion or whatever is one where they don't have pages and blocks and fields. Everything is one content type or one like database entry, and the type is a page, and inside of that page is child nodes, right? So you have
Mhm.
the root node, which is a page, and inside of that root node there's several sections, and those are section nodes, and inside of those sections you have field nodes, and each of those field nodes has like a different type of field where it might be like a title and it might be a paragraph or whatever. And but it gets really weird, but also very flexible because suddenly instead of having a bunch of different pages and a bunch of different meta fields, you have just one database where you have just relationships between fields that build up an entire like Notion page with nested things and references to other pages. And it's like
Right.
super flexible. But it's also like if you ask me to design that database, pfft, yeah, right, way over.
Right.
No, thank you.
Well, even designing the client side parsing library for something like that is
Oh
that
yeah,
that just gets wild.
yeah. It's wild, but it's also like once you kind of have that one system and you have it dialed in,
Yeah.
man, you can build anything with it, and there's
Yeah.
no more migrations that you need to do because like you just add a new field type maybe. But anyway, getting back to the idea of these like ASTs and parsers and whatever, um, it was quite a daunting exploration for me because I didn't have an experience with ASTs or whatever, and it at first it seems very complicated and it's not a lot of great content around building a Babel plugin and all of these
Yeah.
plugin things. So these plugin things are also interesting, right? Because they have these AST explorers and they're called like visitors or like they're plugins that when something needs to
What?
transform a yeah, when something
You're
needs to
called
well,
visitors?
yeah. So
This is
consider
starting to
this.
sound kind of creepy.
Well,
We've
this
got
is
we've
it
got
it's
this
it
we've got
yeah.
this tree structure, and then we've got these visitors, and these visitors they visit inside these nodes in the tree structure. Oh
We
man,
need what are those musical instruments that play like the eerie
a
sci-fi sound?
theremin.
A theremin,
Yeah,
yes.
those are so cool.
Uh, AJ and Kato have one of those.
Of course they do.
Of course they do.
Of course they do. I'm actually shocked you
Yeah,
don't have one,
they're
but
fun. They're fun to play with. Um, so where was I? Yeah, visitors. So yeah, like if you about it, if you have to transform a file and you're using something like Babel, Babel has a bunch of plugins, right? You go to plugin one, then you go to plugin two, then plugin three. Well, each of those plugins needs to transform the same file and pass it on to the next one. And they're these I don't know, build tools, they have different hooks, like when the plugin was initiated, when the file began, when you reached an import statement, when you reached or when you leave the file as you go to the next line, this and that, right? Um, and it's really fascinating. And I think there's a lot of ways to write things that are terribly inefficient. So it's a
that
lot
sounds
more
right.
learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's like the Babel plugin handbook, and some other resources out there that are, I mean, the best as far as the resources, but they're not great if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, so all this to say that I started by writing a Babel plugin, and then I tried to integrate that with Webpack. And Webpack is love-hate relationship because on one hand, I feel like it's very in vogue to just dunk on Webpack these
Yeah.
days. But at the same time, man, how awesome is that tool? Like how awesome was that when it showed up? It
Oh yeah.
it
Versus
it was a game changer.
what was it? Gulp and
Gulp
Grunt.
and Grunt, also awesome tools, you know. And Webpack just like did the whole we can bundle everything. We're not just going to or like what did Webpack do that was different? Uh, it looked at your application as a whole. So instead of just doing like one file at a time and like spitting out just your JavaScript, but then you have to connect your HTML JavaScript import to the output of
Right.
Grunt or Gulp. Webpack's like, don't worry, we're going to give you these like super obscurely hashed asset string names, and we're also going to inject that into your HTML where it needs to go, so you don't have to touch anything. And that's awesome. Webpack is also a pain in the butt to work with. And there wasn't the problem with some of these tools is like it's really hard to learn how to build a plugin for them, you know? So I'm at the point now where I kind of know how to do it, but I also said, you know, I think I'm just going to move over to Vite.
Okay.
So I've actually jumped over to Vite. I got a friend to help me who is Anthony Fu. I think that's his full name. Anyway, Ant Fu on Twitter. Awesome,
Mhm.
awesome developer. Very big in the Vue ecosystem. Does a ton of open source work. By the way, his project slidev, awesome for making presentations. You got to check that out. It's creating presentations with Markdown files.
Oh yeah. This is MDX stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I used it for the last two presentations I've written. So anyway, I get him to help me out
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
he's got a couple. Huh?
I said yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I commissioned him. I threw some cash his way, which felt good because I've used some of his projects and I'm a big fan. So, and plus he's super smart and has done some of this work and has some examples of projects that he's done. So he puts together this Vite plugin, like kind of the framework for it, and I plug in the Babel JS code that I've already written that I know works. It's working today. I think I sent it to you. You should check it out. An example, and Vite uses rollup under the hood. So rollup, very similar to Webpack, does the same like still that same process of you have to run into that AST code. You got to do that transpilation and do the visitor thing and all that stuff. Uh, and there's a couple things that Veet made it a little bit easier. Well, with Anthony's help, made it easier to figure out how to actually take the generated CSS asset and spit it out or inject it into the bundled CSS output.
Okay.
And not only do you need to do that at build time, you also need to provide a good developer experience, which means when someone's writing the code and looking at it in the browser and doing the hot module reload stuff, you have to support that as well, which is its own bag of crazy.
Yeah, I think we both agree that HMR has outlived its utility.
What's the alternative? What's the solution?
Just refresh the browser. It's okay.
Oh
So,
man, that's
all right.
slow.
So, my
Oh,
gripe with HMR comes from Storybook,
okay.
and Storybook is consistently overly cached and broken, and
Well, if it's buggy, if it's a buggy experience, it's bad.
it's so bad.
But then you just Control R and you're good to go. You back to
I have to rebuild.
oh yeah, and that could take a while, right?
It takes them forever. I don't know
Okay, see
why.
that's why I wanted to switch over to V, right? Because I think
Yeah.
for a couple of reasons. One, it's a new age tool that I think offers a really nice experience. Two, if I don't know if there's a lot of libraries. There's a lot of libraries that are doing what I am kind of also doing, that support Webpack and Rollup and stuff like that. I haven't seen many that support V. So get in there early, have like the solution that people might be looking for, and the Vite users. I think Vite is going to be the future. Like I think a lot more tools are going to transition to using Vite. So it's kind of like the market share today is probably on Webpack and then
Oh
Rollup.
yeah, big time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But maybe tomorrow it'll be on Vite, and I can always go back to supporting Webpack. So
Yeah.
it's kind of the idea there. Anyway, that's like a bunch of regurgitation that I just did on thoughts around like these bundlers and AST stuff, and I don't know if any of it was cohesive or whatever, but
Yeah, you
I'll
took
give
us on
you
a little walk through kind of what it took to get your tooling in place. I think that's really valuable, and those experiences I know are, for me at least, like that's where I learned the most.
yeah, like smashing your head against the wall for hours on
Yeah,
end.
like dealing with a
Yeah.
problem that is I'm just like way out of my depth on this, and if eventually you find your way to a solution, however that happens.
Yeah. Here was another thing worth talking about, or kind of related to the decision to go to Vite. Webpack relies on CommonJS.
Mm,
Vite uses Rollup under the hood,
mhm.
which supports ES modules.
Yes.
And I just didn't want to have to deal with the whole, like, do I have to transpile my plugin so that then it works? Like, I want to write my plugin in ES modules. I just want to write ES modules going forward. I don't want to
Right.
deal with CommonJS. Let me just have one syntax for, works in Node now, works in the browser now, whatever. And I just don't want to deal with the whole like const whatever equals require whatever.
Yeah. I mean,
So
I think like those standards and how scattered they are, and we had a show about this, but like I think the ecosystem, especially there, is really frustrating for a lot of developers, and it's very confusing. And I think that's a lot of why there's this like rare specialty in that area, like specifically in that area. It takes a lot to be
like
competent.
tooling,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it takes a lot to be really competent across all of those different standards, and I don't think it's something that we do really well. Like,
Oh, I'm
I think
incompetent. It takes a lot to be incompetent, or at least took me a lot.
It's a big step to get to even the level of incompetence that you've achieved.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Yeah. I see that. Like I think we do really well getting people in the door in software engineering, right? Like I think across the board, like uh entry to maybe some mid-level, it starts to fall apart. Like that material is plentiful and free and pretty easy to find. But I think material just drops off a cliff the more you specialize in one direction or another. There are some exceptions to that, which is like advanced React. I think there's a lot of really good stuff out there. I think it starts to conflict a little bit because it becomes like opinion based. I would assume it's very similar in Viewland. Similar.
Similar. It simulates being the same.
Yes, in Vue.
Yes.
Um, so, but like when it comes to uh, these other specialties, I think Node is kind of the same way, where like you can get to a certain place understanding and learning Node, and material just drops off a cliff. There's one place that does a really good job of that. I'll save them for my shout out, but like Egghead, I think, has placed themselves very well in that they don't mess around with like intro level courses. It's mid
Hmm.
level to advanced courses, and it's straight to the meat of it. Like I think they've done a good job there. That said, you know, it's a walled garden, rightfully so. They should get paid for their work. Um, but there's really not a lot out there. I wish we did a better
Yeah.
job of that.
Yeah. Well, it's tough, and you also bring an interesting point. I don't know if it's the point that you were making, but I thought of it is like as you get into these, uh, tooling is a completely different type of development than
Mhm.
web development. Like I write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but then once you have Node that can be used as a build tool, and you go back to the early days of like using Grunt and Gulp and stuff as like the sort of first iteration of big Node build tools for transforming assets and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, that sort of knowledge that you develop is not super transferable.
Yes.
I mean, it is from a programming sense, right? Like you can pick up a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
like I know about ASTs now and whatever, but uh,
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
none of that
Yeah.
applies to actually building the web.
And
Like
that's
if you focus on building tooling, uh, some of the coolest projects are tooling specific, and those tools allow everyone to build even more cool things. But they themselves are like, like I'm going to build a Veep plugin that isn't ever going to be a website.
right. But it will
Isn't that weird?
be, well, I
Yeah, like
mean, y- it's
millions of
weird,
people
but
are going to build websites with my tool. Billions, probably.
it's the same thing like the rise of the meta frameworks, right? Where there's
Yeah,
like Vuext and Nuxt. I
yeah, you
got
got
it.
it. You're getting
Got
quicker.
it.
You're getting
Yeah.
quicker.
There's Nuxt and Next and Gatsby, and it's a shape, the Gatsby equivalent in Vue.
Gridsome.
Gridsome. It's a shape. It's a grid.
It's a
Anyway,
grid.
this is how I think about things.
Some
Some things. So,
some grid.
but that's part of like the rise of the meta framework is enabling that developer experience. But here's the twist, right? In the point that you made earlier that I totally agree with, which is that the skills that you learn specifically for web development are not broadly applicable when you get to that land. If you don't understand that and you get bit by an error in a meta framework that doesn't make sense to you and you're trying to do something that does make sense to you, things get real sideways real quick. And I think a lot of people have been there. And I think either the transparency of these things or the literacy of kind of understanding build tooling is going to have to like go way up. And this is let's bring it all the way back to remix run.
I was gonna take it there.
Like
Full circle, baby.
I think it's so important that it's something that I saw very clearly on their site is they are errors first, and they care about that part of the developer experience. And I hope that that's true. The people who are working on this are like people that I have a huge deal of respect for, and like, however, as I said earlier, I'm highly skeptical of like the overarching, like everything's going to go to the edge and the client, and like the amount of complexity that adds, as you were kind of alluding to, seems really intense, going from really complex big JS loads on the client to now we're going to do a lot of that work in the build process and static render and really ease things up on the client. Well, now we're just going to do it all in these edge workers, which are kind of the same, but not really the same. I'm going to lean on you pretty heavily to elucidate.
That is a word.
Did I use that word correctly? I don't know.
I don't know. I thought you just made it up, so you tell me.
No, elucidate is almost like illuminate, but to make lucid.
Oh, it is a word.
Yeah, I think I used it correctly. Anyway, I'm going to rely on you to elucidate or illuminate some of these complexities in that space, because no matter how I feel about it, that is definitely the future. Like in the use cases that we're finding for edge functions in the work that we're doing, like it's minimal, but it's pivotal things that we can really get huge performance gains using. So there's a point there somewhere. I hope somebody found it.
Yeah. So you went that full circle back to remix run in a different direction than I was going to. And that is that we were talking about like the meta frameworks and focus on building these build tools and meta frameworks. And then eventually some of that knowledge becomes so uniquely associated to that tool or that framework that, you become so niche that if that tool gets abandoned or forgotten, or you decide to move on or whatever, like that knowledge is not useful. Some of it can be transitionary. Like when I learned React first, and then I moved to Vue, and I had an easier time learning Vue because of the principles that I learned in React, even though the actual code wasn't the same.
Yeah.
However,
that's a really great point, and I have thoughts about it. But
yes, why I want to bring this back to Remix is because the first example on their homepage, at least today, is a form with an input and a button, and none of it is a JavaScript library. It's just HTML.
Yes.
Right. And when you can go back and, if they're just shipping HTML, like if you can learn and understand and like get an intimate understanding of the web primitives of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, those three things, and learn how those things work, I feel like the closer you get to writing those every day, the fewer problems you have, right? It's more dependable code. It's code that you can bring from project A to project B, and things just work as expected because it's a platform that's been evolving for
millennia.
Yeah. How old is the web? 25 years, 30 years?
Oh,
wait, no, it's well over that.
Do you want to go back to the ARPANET? It's
40? Like way old. Yeah, 40 years. That's what it was. Yeah. So, like it's going to be here. It's been around forever. Not forever. It's been around for a long time. I thought that was 40 years. It's been around forever.
Okay, Zoomer.
Yeah. But it's been around for such a long time, and it's going to be around for a long time. Like it's the one thing you can depend on is that.
It's so funny. that you mentioned that this example is a form, right? And that is kind of the crux of the internet is forms,
No,
right?
the crux of the internet is content,
Okay.
documents.
So I would say the difference between a website and a web application is one is form
Ah,
driven
here we
and one is
go.
content driven. Anyway, here's a friend of mine at some point who will probably listen to this was espousing his frustrations about like I'm just so tired of building forms. I'm
Yeah,
like that's all we got.
I love it.
That's
That's all the work, man. That's why
that
I
is
spend so much time studying them and writing about them.
Yeah, you're a big fan of
Love it.
see here's my concern, right? Is that very simple HTML form that Remix Run is shipping down the wire, even though it's very elegant and very performant on the client and very compliant with like our browser standards and all these things. If they're deriving that from more complex React code, which they most definitely are, um, how? Like where are these decisions made? And I'm like super concerned about blind spots because that's such a tricky thing to do. If it's done well, which the people involved are smart folks. uh I just can't imagine. We should get someone on the show to explain this to me as the idiot that I am.
Yeah, what are
um
you saying if they derive this form from some React
mhm.
code?
If they derive a form from React code, how are they
That's
doing
just a
that?
form. That's just JSX spitting out a static form there.
One does not simply derive a form from React code.
What do you mean by derive a form? Like print a form onto the page?
Right. All of the functionality, all the validation, all of the possible state, the other interactions with other components, the refs, where's all this stuff? Like there is a lot of wiring that goes into forms that I've built in React that is not something that would be easily achievable in regular HTML forms. This is like a whole other show that we should get into though.
We should, because
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and say that the more I've written forms in like JavaScript applications,
Mhm.
the less I want to do any of that state derivative forms. Like I just want to print a form to the page, let HTML do its thing. I don't need to track. I don't need binding. I don't need to like track what the user input. Just like
Oh.
put your stuff in, hit submit, it goes to the server. If I need to do some sort of validation to make sure that it like looks right, I'll use HTML5 validation with a little bit of JavaScript to make sure that like, you know, any sort of state is built into like an input that does its own validation, but the larger application doesn't need to pass any information down to that form.
I want whoever is running your like the business side of that and is like, yeah, sure, we can do it that way. Like
Yeah,
whoever's making
well,
those like project like the project owner there, if they're letting you get away with that, power to you. Like that's fantastic.
you know
But
what a really good lever is to pull for
we're
that decision
we're gonna
making?
get sued.
No. You just say, I can do it the way you're asking in 2 months, or I can do it with just HTML in a week.
Oh, but I couldn't do that.
Well, anyway. All right. Well, Grant, I know you got a hard stop
I
here
do.
coming up. So why don't we push it to picks or shout outs, whatever we're calling them.
Well, we got mine
Uh,
already. I'll let you figure yours out for a moment here, but mine is definitely egghead.io. Um, really solid mid-level to advanced content, gets straight to the point. There's a lot of free stuff on there, but there's you want to buy a membership and you want to have access to the really in-depth courses from um, really knowledgeable people. It's amazing stuff, and I need to renew and get a membership again because it's been too long. Um, and I'm getting the itch to work on some of this stuff that you were talking about, Austin. And I know that there's got to be some content on there that can get me started.
What are you talking about? The stuff I was talking about.
Well, now I'm just thinking about build tooling.
You want to work on build tooling?
Yeah, I want to do that. What's your shout out? Who you got? What's happening?
Um, let's see. I don't know if I've. I keep forgetting if I've like picked some of these before or not. All right, I got a good one. Have you
Hmm.
ever seen the movie Tucker and Dale versus Evil?
Yes.
Oh man, that is a good movie. That's my shout out.
That's a fantastic pick. I like that.
Yeah. So I watched that movie. I mean, I used to watch it years ago, but it looked so bad. I had such low expectations for it.
Yeah.
It just like it's a what is it? It's like a horror, like a teen. What are they called? Like a slasher, a teen slasher
Yeah,
parody.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, two guys that are just totally like don't know what the heck's going on. Bunch of teenagers that, well, they go to a weird cabin in the woods, and it's funny. It's a scary movie parody, and it's good. The characters are so nice and endearing. Love them.
Characters are so
They're so
nice.
wholesome. They're so wholesome.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right on, man.
Oh, I also want to pick Great British Bake Off. Speaking of wholesome,
Yeah.
gotta love it. Yeah, that show is scrummy.
Okay. Is that a British word that has some sort of
Clearly, you've
positive
never seen
connotation?
it. It was a word that one of the old hosts, your judges, used. Mary Berry. She's
Mm.
off the show now. I miss her. She was great.
Oh,
Prue's
that was
also good.
your bring back Mary Berry tweet.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. I'm like, I don't know what Austin is talking
yeah, yeah.
about.
You should get
Is
on it,
this
man. It's
some sort
good.
of
It's good
jam?
stuff.
I
It's
think you
good wholesome
massively
stuff.
overestimate the amount of time I can spend watching TV.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
just can't
Well,
do it, man.
why
I
don't you go
can't.
back and watch? Just go. You can watch it instead of Boss Baby.
I don't think
And
Logan would allow that. He actually
no,
specifically asked for Boss Baby the other day. It made me so
Boss
happy.
Baby.
Boss Baby? Like, yeah, dude, we'll put on Boss Baby right on. He's been
That's
asking
cute.
for like the Paw Patrol he was really into right now. Anyway,
Yeah.
I gotta go get him. I will see
Yep.
you in the future.
Yeah. Thanks for chatting, man. It's always a
For
pleasure.
sure. Yeah, good
And
show.
thanks for listening. Give us some love on all the things, likes and whatever. See ya.
Yeah. Bye.